Today, it's the First Time Manager's Guide to Setting Performance Expectations. First time managers, they realize that managing their team is very different from what they thought it would be. The Authentic Leader Show is the podcast for leaders of managers as they transform first time managers into leaders of high performing teams. Since my management failure as a first time manager, it was really more than 25 years ago, I found that there are 6 factors of high performing teams. However, many times when a team member is not performing really at their highest level, it's because at least one of these 6 factors has not been applied by the manager. High performance only happens when all 6 of these factors are applied by the manager of the team. So let's first just talk about why first time managers don't set clear performance expectations. One of the common factors of these 6 that are missing is setting clear performance expectations. First time managers, they just don't set those performance expectations. And here are some of the common reasons that I've found. Well, the first one is that there is lack of clarity. The manager sometimes they themselves are unclear what their expectations are from the team members. They may not have well defined goals or objectives, which help you to get clarity about what those expectations might be. And then, even if they do know what those expectations are, many of them will struggle with how to effectively communicate these expectations with their team members. Another reason that first time managers don't set clear performance expectations is there are constraints of time. Managers' schedules are very full. That was a surprise to me when I first got into management, how full my day became with having meetings, scheduled meetings, working through issues with the team, not to even mention all the additional other work that I was responsible for doing in my role. So it can be sometimes very hard for managers to prioritize spending time with their team and setting those clear performance expectations with each one of their team members. Developing goals and objectives and then connecting them with performance expectation. I mean, it just takes time. Another reason that first time managers are not clearly communicating performance expectations or setting those performance expectations is that they're honestly a little afraid of dealing with a potential conflict, setting clear performance expectations directly with the team member. And it can sometimes create conflict when there's disagreements about what those expectations should be. Especially when you're new in a role as a manager, it can be uncomfortable with having direct and sometimes maybe difficult conversations that could damage the relationship with the team member. It is part of your role as the manager of the team. So you've got to find a way to work through that. We'll talk about that in a moment. Another reason that first time managers are not clearly communicating performance expectations with their team is that there's lack of training. Setting clear performance expectations, it may seem simple, but unless the manager has been trained with how to navigate these conversations and then effectively provide feedback about the performance that they are observing, what they'd like to see them continue doing, but also how they can improve in their performance, that can be difficult. It can unknowingly even damage the situation even further if it's not done properly. So, training can be very important for a first time manager so they can navigate that a little bit more effectively. And then the last reason that first time managers are not setting clear performance expectations is that they're quite honestly a little afraid that the team member could leave. If not done right, a skilled team member, they may ultimately become demotivated or maybe even leave the team ultimately. Although the reasons that first time managers don't set clear performance expectations, they're real. And I mean, believe me, I mean, these things happen every single day. Setting clear performance expectations, it's going to be necessary if you are going to create a high performing team. Now, first time managers must overcome all of these obstacles to provide clear performance expectations with their team. So, how do you do that? How do first time managers set clear performance expectations? Well, setting clear performance expectations, it really helps team members to understand what is expected, and also how they can improve. I mean, nobody's perfect. Nobody is at the ultimate level in their role. So there's always room for improvement, but it's also got to be clear this is exactly what's expected from you in your role. Some tips for first time managers to set those clear performance expectations include the first one I'll share is to clearly define the expectations. I mean, it kind of goes without saying. How are you going to clearly communicate your performance expectations if you don't clearly define those expectations? So, setting clear performance expectations, it includes developing very specific goals and objectives that align with the team's goals and the team member's role. It also includes determining a few key metrics that can not only be measured, but they also demonstrate how the team member is winning in their role. You want your team member to clearly know through the metrics that you're measuring, they know at any given point in time, hey, am I succeeding in my role or not? Another tip is to provide feedback. Feedback to your team, it's a bona fide part of your job, first off. But that feedback to your team really helps your team to know what they should continue doing and, of course, what they should change or maybe no longer do so that they can perform at that high level in their role. Now, when providing feedback, it's imperative that you provide specific feedback as soon as possible. As soon as you observe some sort of performance, you want to give that feedback as soon as possible. In my training programs that I provide, I also make sure that when providing feedback, I stress that the feedback must be both received by the team member and they also must be able to take action. And there are some things and some nuances when providing feedback to ensure that the feedback you are providing it is able to be received by the person you're giving it to. But ultimately, why give feedback if they are not able to take action? So you want to make sure they're set up so that they can take action. The next tip that I'll provide for providing clear performance expectations is that you need to create a plan. I mean, first time managers, they should help their team members with creating a tailored plan for each individual on the team. And that is what ultimately will help them to achieve higher levels of performance in their role. And part of that plan, of course, is working with your team member to determine what their specific goals are and what are those incremental milestones that will actually ultimately help them get there. Another key tip for first time managers when setting clear performance expectations is to make sure that you're having one on one conversations with your team. A key tool to help first time managers to do this is to set up regular and recurring one on one meetings with each member of your team. Now, although there is an agenda template that I recommend and I provide to my leadership clients, part of this template and part of this tool is to help the team member to identify what are those obstacles that are keeping them from higher levels of performance from whatever level they're in right now. What is going to be the committed action that the team member will take so that they can overcome those obstacles? The last tip that I'll provide for first time managers to set those clear performance expectations is to support the team member. What are those necessary resources that they need? And also provide access to those resources. Resources could include things like access to materials or to a database or providing some additional training. Maybe it's even delegating some strategic work so that you can provide them some experiences or coaching or mentoring programs or other ideas where you can support your team member. So let's recap what we talked about here. We talked about why first time managers don't set clear performance expectations. And the first one is lack of clarity, right? They're just not clear themselves. The manager's not clear themselves what performance expectations they have. The constraints of time, I mean, that's real. You've got to find a way to work through that. You have to spend time with your team and making sure that you're spending time with them to make sure they're clear about what their performance expectations are. The third one is to make sure you're dealing with potential conflict. Like think through what might be the conflict that you have here, but also being brave enough and tackle that on head on. You can't avoid the potential conflict and not provide clear performance expectations because you're concerned about the potential conflict that might come with it. Lack of training is another. So get yourself some training. Make sure that your first time manager has the training necessary so they have the skills for setting clear performance expectations. And then get let's get past this thing about the team member could leave. Actually, those high performers in your team not being clear about what their performance expectations are, that itself could also cause them to leave the role they're in, because if they're high performers, they just want to know what's expected of them, and by not communicating it to them that can cause them to leave sometimes. I've seen that happen numerous times. So what are those ideas for how to set those clear performance expectations? Is number one is make sure you're clearly defining the expectations. I mean, make the time to sit down, write it out. Just make sure you're clear about what those expectations are so you can communicate it with your team. Make sure you're providing regular feedback as soon as possible to your team about the performance that you're observing. Make sure you're having those regular, recurring one-on-one conversations with your team. Support the team member. Give them the resources that they need. Give them the access to the things they need. Taking these steps, along with the other 6 factors of success, those first-time managers, they can help their team members to become high performers on their high-performing teams. Now, if you'd like to see if your first-time manager qualifies for the First-Time Manager Summit, you can learn more at AuthenticSuccessOnline.com. Now, our February First-Time Manager Summit was a great success. So we are doing it again in the spring of 2023. I'm telling you, you do not want your first-time manager to miss out on this next summit. If you can relate to anything that I shared here today, or if you'd like to ask me any additional questions, I would love to talk with you. You can just put a comment right here and I'll be glad to respond. You can also DM me, or you can reach out to me through my LinkedIn profile. You can connect with me on LinkedIn and find me on LinkedIn at I am Christopher Jones. You can find more information and get other free resources when you go to ChristopherRJones.com. Hey, I want to thank you for joining us today. Come back next week for another episode.